Today I'm going to be talking about my favorite book in the Bible, Ecclesiastes. I really wanted to do a review on this book, my thoughts, opinions on this book, because I just found it very interesting. It's very, very unique compared to the other books in the Bible. The person who is believed to write Ecclesiastes is King Solomon. He was known as the wisest person that ever lived and also the richest ruler that ever lived. Economic historians estimate that his net worth is estimated to be around $1 to $2 trillion in modern day time. He wrote this book towards the end of his life. Like when he was younger, he was much more obedient, much more on fire for God. As it is a well-known fact, he had a lot of wives. He had about 700 wives, 300 concubines. So he had a total harem of 1,000 women. And God warned him that these women will make him worship false gods. And that's exactly what ended up happening. He ended up worshiping false gods because those were the gods of those women. The book of Ecclesiastes starts off with meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless. But the actual Hebrew word that it is actually translated from is actually called havel. So it actually says havel, havel, everything is havel. And what the Hebrew word havel translates to is smoke and vapor, almost like a mist. And there's a really good reason for that. What King Solomon meant by that is that life is very fleeting. And even though smoke and mist is real, it's very fleeting and it has the illusion that you can grab it. But as soon as you try to hold on and grab onto it, then the mist disappears and you can't grab it. So it's almost like an illusion. So throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, King Solomon is trying to dismantle everything that people put their lives in. Whatever meanings, whatever different meanings that people have in their lives. And he's going one by one down the list, trying to prove something, which we'll get to by the end of this video, so stick around. So he starts off with dismantling wisdom. Seems fair enough, right? Wisdom doesn't seem like too bad of a thing to put your life meaning in at the surface level, so that's exactly what he did. He set out to be the wisest person on earth. He did everything he could to attain wisdom, and that he did. But he said in Ecclesiastes that he noticed that what's crooked cannot be straightened and what's lacked cannot be counted. And what he meant by that was, even though he attained all this knowledge, there's some realities of life that you cannot do anything about and that you can't change. So even though you have all this knowledge, you can't really do anything about it. From much wisdom comes great sorrow, and from much knowledge comes great grief. So it reminds me of that famous quote that says, ignorance is bliss. And what ignorance is bliss means is sometimes the way that life works is the less you know, the better for some realities of life. So the next thing he tried to go ahead and dismantle was pleasure. So he went on a little bit of a tangent talking about all the things he accomplished in life, all the houses that he built, all the women that he ended up having. After chasing all of that and describing in his words that there wasn't a desire in his heart that he didn't satisfy or fulfill, that he ended up having the feeling of something called chasing the wind. Now, the actual Hebrew word definition is more closer to desiring the wind or feeding on the wind. And what King Solomon meant by that was multiple fold. First thing about chasing after the wind is it's something that you can't control. So you're putting your life's purpose on something you can't control, something that's not tangible. And then the second part about chasing the wind is you're consuming something that is substanceless. Because keep in mind, the second definition to that is feeding on the wind. And what that means is, like you could think of, like you can guess probably, is that if you try to feed on the wind, your stomach is gonna still be empty. Which, to be honest, really encapsulates what pleasure feels like. Is you think you're feeding on something real, but it just keeps on leaving you empty and desiring for something more. The next meaning of life that he ends up dismantling is your life revolving around your career or your job. The conclusion he ended up coming up with that is even after all the things that he toiled over and built by his hard work and by all of his efforts, he basically at the end has to experience death, and he has to leave it for someone else that hasn't toiled for it and that hasn't worked for it. And he fell into a great despair because of that. But then in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 8, he ended up talking about a man that had no son, no brother, but was toiling and working extremely hard just basically for himself. And he thought that that was also a miserable business and also vanity. So two things where it seems contradictory, but it's not. What he's trying to do here is he's trying to trap the reader into realizing that both scenarios, whether you try to leave an empire for your kids, the kids might end up foiling that empire. And then even if you try to hoard all that wealth for yourself, that also is despair and miserable because you're leaving out responsibility and you're leaving out community and you're leaving out relationships. And that's also miserable. Then also on an additional point, he talked about how if you have the love for money, that it'll never end up being enough as well. So that was another additional point that he had to add when it comes to money, just the pursuing of career or jobs, and like that being your entire world. He's not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing. You need to survive. And to be honest, there was even one part of Ecclesiastes where he talked about the dead know things and have no knowledge of the living. And what he meant by that also is that that's where that same part, that same area of the verse, he actually encouraged working extremely hard, because when you're dead, you can't actually do that. You can't enjoy and be satisfied with your hard work. So it's not saying not to work hard, but what he's trying to say is don't put that over God, and that's not your true meaning in life. So I can go on and on about all the things that he continued to talk about of different topics that people put their lives in, but it'll get a little bit redundant, so I'll move on from here. So next, I'm going to be talking about the gifts of God that he saw, and also the final conclusion that he ended up coming up with for this problem of life. So one gift of God that he witnessed and he stated in Ecclesiastes was a person eating, drinking, and finding satisfaction in their toil. So he just talked about how just eating, just the simple thing of just eating, drinking, and being satisfied with your work, with your career, with whatever substance that you have, he's seen the hand of God in that simpleness of life. And he's seen that as a gift from God. He talks about how God gifts two gifts when he actually gives someone wealth. He gives the wealth, he gives the money, but he also gives a secondary gift, which is the ability to actually enjoy that wealth. So now you might be asking, what was his final conclusion, right? So keep in mind, he purposely trapped the reader into eliminating all of his options on what he could actually put his life's meaning into. Now you're stuck towards the end of the book asking, what solution is there and what should I put my life in? And then he ends up answering that in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 13, where he says, fear God and keep all of his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. And God will bring judgment to every deed, whether it's good or evil. Now, you might be asking, well, why that conclusion? Why did he come up with that conclusion? After living the life that he lived, an extremely full life, full of experiences, why did he ended up choosing that conclusion out of all of the possible other conclusions? And the reason why I think he came up with that conclusion is because if death ends all of your earthly gains, then any sorts of meaning that cannot survive death is ultimately insufficient. So what I ended up learning from this and the patterns that I've seen in what King Solomon was talking about was that everything that he believed was a gift from God were the simple things in life, the things that were within God's commandments, but were also simple, like being able to eat, drink, be merry, and having satisfaction in the work that God provided you. And all the other things in life that were outside of that, like always focusing on the future rather than the present, ended up not satisfying you and leaving you empty. So tell me, let me know down in the comments. Make sure you like and subscribe, and let me know what your thoughts is about how you feel about the book of Ecclesiastes. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments. And until next time.